Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our studies of First Kings. Today we're in First Kings chapter 3, and Solomon has established his throne, as it were. It is recognized and it is understood that he is the king. And here in chapter 3, we're going to see the development of Solomon's wisdom and reputation before the people. There's a number of different avenues that we can look at in regard to this, but I want us to notice two or three things that are stated about Solomon here in chapter 3. The first one, in the early parts of the chapter, in verses 2 and 3, relate to the way that Solomon went about worshiping God. It is stated that David was one who was the epitome of the source of how God was worshipped, and showing and illustrating the way that God was to be worshipped. And if you look at many of the Psalms, you find that that is exactly the case. And Solomon is going to walk in David's footsteps in almost everything. The only difference, it says in verse 3, is in the fact that Solomon used the high places. Now, that doesn't mean a whole lot to us as far as that goes, but let me just take a moment and kind of describe what that is discussing. You have in Israel the Ark of the Covenant, you have the commands for the tabernacle and for the altars of burnt offering and the altar of incense and all of these various things. But there is also within Israel many of these high places. These high places would be the locations at which the gods of the Canaanites would be offered sacrifices, and there would be sacrifices that would be offered to Baal and to Molech and to various other gods by either the Canaanite peoples, or at times where the children of Israel are not following God the way that they should. And so these high places are places that various kings we're going to read about are going to be ones who tore down the high places and various things such as that of that nature, because they were utilized in worship to other gods. But here it states that Solomon was one who went to these high places in order to worship God. The distinction being, these places were utilized not just for the worship of God in the way that they were designed and in the way that they were utilized. And so here you have Solomon, who is going through and he's offering sacrifices to God. He is doing all of these things. But verse 2 talks about the fact that the people sacrificed at the high places because there was no house built for the name of the Lord until those days. And so you have the Ark of the Covenant that's in Jerusalem, but there's not been this formal tabernacle that has been put in place to our understanding in the way that it was in the days of Moses. You don't have the temple being built at this time, and so there are many ways in which the people are just kind of trying to choose themselves where things are going to be offered and where they're going to take things to make offerings. Solomon, like the rest of the people, has chosen to go to the high places to make his offerings before the Lord. And yet it is in some ways a place that God is sharing with the false gods. And so there is this distinction that is being made here, that Solomon, while he worships and he loves the Lord and he is walking in the statutes of David, in the things that David told him to do, at the same time, things aren't as good as they could be when it comes to the way that Solomon is going about doing things. And so we see this little caveat here in the first part of chapter 3. And yet it is not a matter of Solomon not wanting to do what is right, not being interested in doing what God says, or anything of this nature. It is one of the peculiarities of the time in which Solomon lives. In the second place, you come down in chapter 3, and you begin to see the famous question that God asks to Solomon about what it is that Solomon wants. What it is that is Solomon's desire. Verse 5, God comes to him in a dream and he says, "What should I give you?" Solomon doesn't ask for riches. He doesn't ask for wealth. He does not ask for a long life. He does not ask for any of those physical attributes. Instead, he shows his humility and he calls himself but a young child. In other words, that's not to say that he is literally a young child, but rather that he does not know enough to be able to do the job properly. Solomon is at this time in his 20s, and he is not an old man by any stretch of the imagination. He is still considered a very young man to be a king. And Solomon, therefore, asks God for wisdom. He says in verse 9, "Give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to judge this great people of yours?" Give me the wisdom, Solomon says, to judge the difference between good and evil, between right and wrong, to be able to be a faithful judge for justice for my people. God is going to grant him that wish. And at the same time, he is going to tell him that because he did not ask for those things, because he showed that those things were not the greatest priority in his life, God is going to bless him with long life and with the riches and the wealth and the things of that nature. And Solomon is truly going to become powerful because his ultimate desire wasn't power. His ultimate desire was to be the best leader of God's people that he could possibly be. There is something to be said for individuals whose first desire is not for power and authority, but whose first desire is to serve to the best of their ability. That is the attitude of Solomon. And it is something that we could learn from, and we need to learn from, when it comes to learning lessons from Solomon in our lives. And then the end of chapter 3 is illustrating the scenario that Solomon has placed before him of the two prostitutes. And they are going to be those who are going to each have a baby within a few days of each other. They live in the same house. They sleep in the same room, is the indication. One of them is going to roll over on her baby in the middle of the night while sleeping and smother it. And then she's going to switch babies with the other woman. So the woman whose baby it is comes before Solomon and says, "Judge between us." And of course, one vehemently says that the baby is hers, and the other vehemently says that the baby is hers. So Solomon says, let's cut the baby in half. Divide the living child in two, give one half to each of them, and make them both happy. And of course, the mother of the living child says, no, just give the child to the other. Whereas the one who is not the mother of the child really couldn't care less one way or another. Solomon utilizes that wisdom and shows that wisdom in such a way that he is able to gain the respect and the honor, not just of those who are present on this occasion, but of all who hear the story of what Solomon was willing to do to find the truth and to illustrate the truth and to bring justice to a mother of a little baby who had no standing, who had no prestige, and who had no honor in Israel. These are some of the things that I see in 1 Kings chapter 3. Solomon's wisdom is going to go and be famed throughout the world. And Solomon is going to be a very wise king, and he's going to do many good things. He's not going to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But his desire is to serve God, and his desire is to be the type of king that his father wanted him to be. Next time, we'll come back and we'll begin examining 1 Kings chapter 4. I hope you'll join us then. But until then, have a great day.